Earlier today, I had a chance to speak to a group of altar servers from parishes around the diocese. And my task was to talk to them about the proper reverence when they are serving at the altar. So I can report they were very attentive, very eager to understand better this great role that they play. In fact, you can watch closely. Some of those servers were there today, are serving here now at this Mass. And as we talked about the idea of reverence, the first comment that came is that it is a form of respect. And so we talked about, well, what's the difference really? We have two words, respect, reverence. What's the difference between respect and reverence? And so as we discussed it, we kind of settled on the idea that respect is important and it is the way that we should treat people around us. But reverence is different because that's really what we direct toward God. And so when we are dealing with God, we are not just dealing with another person that deserves our respect, someone who can help and guide us, someone that is really a brother or sister that we ought to be careful with. But rather, with God, we are dealing with the creator of everything, the one who gives us life. Because we are in that relationship with the one who gives life, the one who has power over death itself, the one who creates everything, well, that demands something different from us. Now, this is important in the work of serving at the altar. Children who begin serving should grow in their understanding of how reverence is expressed in the function of being an altar server. But it also strikes me that we have a very clear depiction in our readings today of what reverence is supposed to look like. And there is an aspect of reverence that separates it from respect, an aspect that really is best described as fear. We look at the way reverence is depicted in our readings for today, because we have three different people who come into contact with the living God, who come into contact with this creator of everything. It starts in our first reading with the call of Isaiah as a prophet, a man chosen by God to give voice to the truth about who God really is. And when Isaiah realizes that he has come into contact with God, his response is, "Woe is me, I am doomed, for I am a man of unclean lips, living among a people of unclean lips." Certainly reflecting this fear because he realizes the power of the God that he has come into contact. Woe is me, I am doomed. In the gospel, we have Peter realizing who Jesus is. We see a kind of change. We see this fisherman being told by a carpenter how to fish. But because Peter has respect for Jesus, he doesn't contradict him. Out of respect, he goes ahead and follows what Jesus says, "Cast your nets again." He does not realize in that moment who he's actually dealing with. Because all of a sudden, the miracle happens. And Peter begins to realize this is not just a teacher that I have come to respect. This is someone with power over the very elements themselves. Someone able to bring fish out of the water in a way that should be impossible. This is someone else entirely. This is the living God. And when Peter realizes what's going on, he shifts from respect to the kind of reverence that captures who he is now with. He falls down on his knees and he says, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. I have no business being here." He also comes to this sense of a fear because he sees the gap between who he is and the sin of his life with the living God. Even Paul in our second reading, he is recounting the fact that he was a man who had persecuted the church. And then Jesus appears to him. And he comes face to face also with the living God in this moment of conversion. And as he looks back in that moment, he says, "And he appeared to me as last of all, as one born abnormally, the least of the apostles, not even fit to be called an apostle." And so in each of these encounters, we see the humility that expresses reverence, a recognition that we are somewhat fearful because of the gap between our lives and the God who comes into our presence. So this is important that we understand this notion of reverence. This is what happens at Mass as the Lord himself comes present for us on the altar. It is not something we should be careless about, something rather that we should demonstrate as much reverence as we can muster. But in the encounter with the living God that we see in each of these passages, while the response of the human, Isaiah, Peter, Paul, is this fear, this unworthiness to stand before the living God, in each of these encounters, we also see the response of the living God. Because this living God, who knows full well the gap between these sinful men and him, he calls them even with those sins. Each one of these stories accounts this recognition of who God is in the very moment that this God, who knows full well who they are, calls them still. And so after Isaiah says, "Woe is me, I am doomed," it tells us that despite his sin, he is purified. It tells us this symbolic touching of his lips to purify who he is. And the end result of this encounter is a voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send?" And Isaiah says, "Send me. I will go." Peter, falling on his knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." He hears the response of the living God that says, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. You will share in my work as the one who seeks souls." And Paul, despite acknowledging that he doesn't even deserve to be called an apostle, accepts the fact that he is called to be this great apostle. And so we have this reality of reverence, a humble recognition that we do not deserve to be in the presence of God, but the generous outpouring of the same God who calls us even still. Paul, in this reading, also identifies why this is possible. Because after saying that he did not deserve to be an apostle, he says this line, and this is the line that we should hold on to, especially as we celebrate the sacrament of confirmation today. A line that I would ask all of you to hold on to as you approach this living God yourself, asking for confirmation. St. Paul captures it very clearly. He says, "But, despite my sin, but by the grace of God, I am what I am." By the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace in me has not been ineffective. By the grace of God, I am what I am. His grace in me has not been ineffective. This is how we stand before the living God. Not because we have earned it, not because an act of humility then makes us worthy. We only are able to stand in the grace of the living God, in the presence of the living God, because of his grace, because he makes up the difference, because he overcomes the gap that exists between us, because he calls us and provides for us despite our weakness. This is crucial for all of us who have received the grace of confirmation. Because in just a moment, you will make a profession of what you believe. You will claim your belief in the living God. And that should come with a certain aspect of fear, a recognition that I have no business being in this place. But God makes up the difference. God provides, knowing full well who I am. And so we do not approach God with a sense of accomplishment on our own, but with empty hands, ready to receive what the Lord provides. Because this moment of our recognition in humility is also a moment of the generosity of God. And so as you come forward now for this sacrament, and as all the rest of us who have already been confirmed witness this act and are renewed in that grace, my hope is that the words of St. Paul can take deep root in us so that we can accept whatever God calls us to. That we can acknowledge on the one hand our own sinfulness and on the other hand this great gift of God. So that like St. Paul, each of us is able to also say, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And His grace in me has not been ineffective."